What is the secret to unlocking your full potential? What makes your idols any different than you? How do you become the person you've always wanted to be in life? This is where you get all of your questions answered. My name is Justin Shank, and I sit down with some of the most epic individuals who are changing the world with their actions in business and in life. We discuss how they did it, why they pushed themselves, and more importantly, how they were able to focus on continuous growth to achieve their dreams. Welcome to the Growth Now movement. This week, I sit down with Johnathan Lee Iverson. Johnathan is best known as the voice of the greatest show on earth, Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. For 20 years, Johnathan was the leader and ringmaster of this great show, until it closed. You see, Johnathan was the last ringmaster, but he was also the first. When Johnathan was chosen as the ringmaster, he was also the very first black person to be put in that role. It took them 140 years, but Johnathan then broke that color barrier and went on to be one of the best-known ringmasters of all time. In this episode, we dive into Black Lives Matter. How can we address it? How do we begin to solve the divide? We talk about how you can improve all your relationships by approaching them with love. This episode, without a doubt, is a cannot miss. Johnathan brings so much energy and passion into this conversation. I think you guys are going to love it. Now, before we get there, I want to remind you guys that Growth Now Movement Live is coming, and it's coming quick. So head over to gnmlive.com, get your tickets now, and join us in September right here in Reading, Pennsylvania. I can't wait to see you there. Now, without further ado, let's get to the episode with Johnathan Lee Iverson. Johnathan, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about the conversation. You know, we both spoke at Terry Weaver's event back in, not this last May, obviously, but the May before, down in Orlando, Florida. And you were somebody who I want to say you were a surprise speaker. And you came on the stage, and I was blown away by your energy, by your message, by your life's journey. And I'm really, really excited to dive into that on this show and share some wisdom with my audience, man. But why don't we take a second now and talk about who is Johnathan now, and then we'll talk about the journey and how you got there.
Well, Johnathan now is, I'm with the rest of the country, rest of the world. I'm on a global timeout. Honestly, I'm on a reset. I'm in pruning season, as I called it. And that's what I've taken advantage of this time to do that. I'm, exercising more. I'm creating more. I started a talk show. That's right now it's featured on YouTube, but I do intend on making it a podcast. It's called Instant to Ring. And I really just interview a lot of different, interesting people, some in the circus world, some in just different fields and things like that, but they're all interesting to me. And I think they're interesting to our audience. I also started Ringmaster Storytime, which is every Sunday evening around 8:30 p.m. And it's featured on my Facebook Live fan page. And so we go live at 8:30. It's about 25 minutes of just some wonderful, whimsical, time together. I come in with the Ringmaster garb and I read a wonderful bedtime story for everyone. Sometimes I do a double feature. I'll read 2 stories, or I'll add a poem in there. They might be some songs and things like that. But, it's just something I thought of initially as kind of a relief for parents. Other than that, I've been just really enjoying my family. I'm really blessed. My mother happened to be visiting just before the pandemic hit. So she's been down here for quite a while, spoiling us, her and her little partners in crime. AKA her grandchildren, my children. They've been having a blast, enjoying each other. And we've been enjoying each other, just enjoying each other's company, learning some new skills, learning some new things. I went and got an insurance license. I passed my test. Well, we're waiting to process I have to apply for the license now. I did the fingerprinting and all of that. And so I'm looking forward to venturing into that. And I'm also into doing remote voiceover work as well. I've done some things for some people thus far, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more. I actually joined this forum called Now on Deck, and it's a forum of different voices from the world of sports, just great announcers. And I was invited to put my voice in. It's really a forum for people to come on if, they want something for party or, something for their voicemail, something, and they basically order which voice they want. So yes,
That's
folks,
cool.
the voice of the greatest show on earth is now on deck. And so it's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. So, I'm just growing like everybody else, just cutting away the dead stuff, the things and distractions, doing a lot of soul assessment, which is so important, because I just think at the end of the day, that first command is to be fruitful and multiply, man. And if you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. You need to be constantly in a state of growth. As the great Andre DeShields, Tony Award-winning Andre DeShields once said, at the top of every mountain peak is the bottom of another. So keep climbing. And so that's what I intend to do.
No, and I love that. And so, it's interesting to hear what you've been up to, because when we met, you were transitioning, right? Like and obviously if people listen to the intro, they know that you were the last ringmaster for Barnum and Bailey's Circus. And it shut down. And you go, well, what do I do next? What's the next stage in my career as I've built my whole entire life? And I want to get into the whole Harlem Boys Choir. I think there's amazing things there. But you built your life in stories, right? Like you did the Harlem Boys Choir that led to the circus, and there's crazy stories about that. And now you're like, now it's time to create the next story. And what's that look like during quarantine when I thought I was going to be traveling and speaking and doing these things, and now everything's shut down. So let's talk a little bit about the journey to getting into the circus. So the fun thing about me is I've never been to the circus. I wasn't a Disney fan until I became friends with Terry. Then I learned about Disney, then the circus and all these things, right? And now I'm intrigued by this form of entertainment that unfortunately isn't as big as it used to be. But let's talk a little bit about how you grew up and really began to get into the entertainment world a little bit.
I am always so curious to meet people who went to the circus. That's like child abuse. I always say, sue your parents or something, man. I'm like, it's such a, I think the circus at its best, it's just such a wonderful escape. And it's such an innocent and wonderful display of excellence and art really at its highest level, because I think when your art might cost you your life, you're pretty good at what you do. Yeah. But my journey into it was, quite frankly, just happenstance, and a good happenstance. As you stated, I was in the Boys Choir of Harlem as a child, and that was a charming life, a very charming life. I really learned how to work for something. I had very demanding teachers my entire life. It's interesting, like all of my major teachers who had great influence on me, they've all passed on now. One, even recently, I went to LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts. And I just remember how much they loved me enough to, kick me in the behind, And it didn't matter how talented I was. It didn't matter how much promise I was. In fact, they were hard on me. And because they didn't want me to settle, they didn't want me to rest on my laurels.
Did you view it like that when you were a young boy, or were like, man, these teachers are so tough? And
strangely enough, I did. Like, I got it because they would do it with a twinkle in their eye. My teachers were generally fair. Yeah. And they weren't always, they didn't always have their foot on my head. It was balanced. And I knew, right. I've always been a kid that I knew when I was in a wrong, I'm wrong. You don't have to find me. And I'm like that till this day. If I screw up, you don't have to find me. I'll find you. I'll let you know, look, that's on me. Even if, I may have offended somebody and I didn't know it, or it wasn't my intention. If you came up to me and said, hey, there will be no buts, and I didn't mean it. If I hurt you, and I'm sorry, even if I didn't intend to. So my teachers, they really put that in me. And a lot of it really is rooted from my parents. My mother was great. My father, he wasn't absent. He was just a cameo performer in my life, but he was significant. He was just over the bridge in Brooklyn. I grew up in Manhattan, but he was always there when I needed him. He took me to all the, he drove me to all my, to the airport, picked me up, when I come off tour. He was the one who helped pay my way through college, and he would drive me up to school and stuff like that. And he'd really have some great heart-to-heart conversations, practical conversations that immigrant fathers tend to have with their kids. And, so I learned a lot. I had a good base of support when I entered the boys choir, and the boys choir just enhanced my life. And LaGuardia High School, made it bloom even more. I had this terrific double life when I was a kid, because I was in this great high school, which was like, really the best thing in the world. I loved high school. It was Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts, the FAME school.
Right.
And so I was there, and all my teachers were cool. And they could be hard, and it was great, but they were really, all of the good ones really got the best out of me. Sure. And I always appreciated that. But I would be touring while going to school, which wasn't uncommon for that school. There were a lot of other kids who, some had soap opera gigs, some had Broadway gigs, some had all different stuff. So, when I would be touring with the boys choir, I'd take a syllabus on tour. We have a school teacher who also was singing with us, and a whole big thing. So we were always heavily guarded, and that was great, but I think the thing that stuck out in my mind, and still does till this day, is just how important it is to have people who are willing to go all the way with you.
Yeah.
Who are willing to see you through to home base. Those are the types of teachers I had. Who just watched me grow, who could monitor how I grow, who could give me sound advice, and who respected my growth the more and more I matured into an adult. And people, even when I became a professional, I run into my teachers every now and then, and they still drop some serious nuggets on me. And here I'm like, but I'm in history books, but it didn't matter. They still remember the knucklehead who was in homeroom, So I was just very blessed in that respect. And then I went to college, the Hart School of Music, a great school, where I studied with the magnificent and the late great Jerome Pruitt, who is one of the great tenor singers, I think, in opera ever. And I went to the school specifically to study with him. So I was on track to becoming an opera singer. That was the whole point. And graduating from there, I had plans to go to Europe to further my studies. And, running around to auditions, a funny thing happened. I was trying to just raise money. I was presented with this really wonderful opportunity to make history. And that was Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey. And I jumped on it. The audition process was rigorous, of course. But, obviously the rest was history, because I ended up getting it. And that was a wonderful adventure. It was one of these things where when I got it, it's funny. I harkened back to something my mother had told me about always pursuing what it is you are, because you don't know what kind of doors will open up for you, but you need to stick to it. And she was right, because I went to college, and of course, you go through these freshman doubts, as they say, and, you're like wondering, well, this thing I'm studying, is it going to be secure enough, right?
Right.
And, I changed I remember I changed my major to like music management or something like that. And like 24 hours later, I changed it back, and I just stuck to what I was doing. Not because music management was, overwhelming, but, I just made a commitment.
Sure.
And quite frankly, I didn't really know how I was going to do things, but somehow when I really set my heart to it, set my mind to it, the resources, the people, the things showed up. And I think it was the same thing with Ringling Brothers. Now, what's funny about that is, Ringling Brothers tour back then was about 2 years at most. And the producers of the show were very blunt with me. They said, look, we'd love to have you here for 20 years if you want to be here. And they told me that my first year. Wow. So, it's like, to hear that's like, wow, gravy. But it took me time to really appreciate that, because I intended to do it for a year or two and then run off to Europe and continue my pursuits there. But I'm so happy it turned into 18 years of wife and 2 kids later. It really was the greatest adventure of my life. I met so many wonderful people. I had so many great experiences. But more importantly, I was able to use my talents to reach so many people in many ways that I'm still hearing about now. And it's really wonderful.
Yeah. Now I want to backtrack a little bit into what was your draw into entertainment, right? Like, obviously, look, we all at some point we all get bit by something, right? I want to go be a baseball player. I want to go be an actor. I want to go be a singer, whatever. We all have something, a professional dancer. But you're somebody who at a young age, you got bit by this bug and you truly pursued it your whole life. So it's kind of a 2-part question. Like what was it that got you into singing? Like, how did you even know you were good? And then secondly, like, what made you push through? Because look, these are massive hurdles. You're talking about Harlem Boys Choir. That's not a joke. Like, that's serious to be a part of that. And I'm sure you share the stage, and I think you talked about this a little bit at the conference, but you shared the stage with massive names and have, sang at some of the greatest venues and so on and so forth. But then you take that into entertaining for 18 years in the circus, and then we'll get into that too. But what was it? What was the bite? Like, what bit you? And then what made you push through those hard times? Like, okay, I got to keep pushing forward to get to the next level.
Right. Well, pure vanity, honestly. I mean, when I was a kid, you just have this idea, you see certain celebrities or whatever, and you go, oh, I want that, I mean, I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when Michael Jackson was God on earth, right?
Yeah.
And, because I remember when he whipped out the moonwalk. And so you saw that stuff and you saw what you thought was adoration, what have you. And of course you want that for yourself. I wasn't an insecure kid or anything. I just was vain, yeah. like a lot of people. It started with that. And it also started with a curiosity. I wanted to travel. I wanted to expand my world. And the Boys Choir of Harlem presented itself as a vehicle for that.
Yeah.
And so with that, I said, okay. I ventured into the boys choir. It was the hardest 18 months of my life when I first got in, because I thought I was just going to get in and start singing and it was okay. Because, I mean, these kids look like me. I mean, they're kids like me. What's the big deal? It's just singing. And I didn't realize when I first got, this was a real serious professional organization with very high standards. And it was such an awakening for me at 11 years old, and it was great. And I worked my tail off, and I finally, out of nowhere, finally got a shot at 13. And what really lit the fire for me, one of the things is, it's funny, you get into something. My mother wouldn't let me quit. And she wouldn't acquiesce to my mediocrity at all. I just I went through the torment of, I gotta go. Finally, I got my break. And it was gravy then. But there was this beautiful trip to Japan, which I still cherish to this day.
That's amazing.
We went to Japan twice in the summer of 1989. We did our tour, and then we went back for a special engagement honoring President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan. They just left office anyway, but it was a friendship concert. And at that concert, where there were luminaries like Perry Como, he was still alive, right?
Yeah.
But then there was the one and only Placido Domingo, who I didn't know from a ham sandwich. I knew nothing about him. There was an older kid member of the choir, because sometimes the boys choir, we had soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. As you can imagine, children are going to be singing tenor and bass. So he would hire ringers, or he would hire former members who had grown into themselves, and they'd come in. And so one of these members came up to me and said, I want you to hear what a real tenor sounds like. And they introduced Placido Domingo, and my mind was blown. And my whole system, my entire body lit up from inside out. Wow. And I set my sights on, that's what I wanted to do. And so that was a motivation. And so I'd already been through a very trying process to get to that point. So I had that in me, and I was enjoying the fruits of it. I mean, my middle school years were just wonderful. I mean, like, I was traveling like crazy. I remember we sang for Nelson Mandela when he had just been released.
Wow.
We were on the soundtrack of the movie Glory with Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman.
Great movie.
And that was just such a wonderful experience, being in the Hollywood studio under the baton of the late, great James Horner and his beautiful music. And it was just it was like I was in a whirlwind. And so seeing the work that I put in, not giving up and persevering and seeing it through, and then being able to see the fruits of that at that early age, it's the reason why I take you back to the fact that my teachers, having hard teachers, is what I expected. Because I knew they had my best interest, because I saw the results. And so I was an easy student, because I was like, okay, there's something at the end of this trial here. There's something, if I just keep doing what I'm supposed to do, I can enjoy it. And so having that kind of experience early is really what pushes me even now. I don't wilt easily. I don't bully well, because my teachers was, I am the founder and director of Boys Choir of Harlem. They'd arrest him today. They would. He used to tell us. Yeah, he used to tell us, he said, if you can get through me, he said, if you can deal with me, you can deal with anybody in your life. And he was right. I don't sweat anybody. I'd be like, I just don't have that in me. It's like, I think he came from that school of instruction where you put steel in your children. And he was very consistent. In fact, all of my really good teachers, they were always consistent. They were not only consistent, they were brilliant at what they did. They were really thorough. And I think what I love most about them is they really, really loved music. And they had such a heart for service to the children in their charge. I mean, they were so protective of me and protective of my voice and protective of how I did things. I mean, they'd get on me if I was doing something that was a bit out of my maturity range. They just I could hear them now if they were watching these doggone reality talent shows with these little kids singing arias. They would probably throw a shoe at the television or break it, because it's an abomination. It's blasphemy. There's certain things your body's just not ready for. And I've always had that in mind. They were very, it was like having a coach in your ear all the time. How you ate, how you worked your body out, what kind of rep you would sing. What rep is right for you? What's your life experience at this point to do that type of rep? All those things, they respected my development. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful. And it's held me in good stead.
Do you still have coaches in your life now, or is it still those internal coaches that have taught you your whole life?
Both. I still have coaches. I still have a wonderful voice teacher who I consult with. And I've been meeting new people who I glean from. I mean, I'll even say Terry Weaver. He's this interesting guy, man. He's an affectionate guy, but he's so serious about what he does. And he has such a passion really for really seeing people have live out their best selves. And I get his particular ministry. I get it. Because, I can't say he's wrong at all, because really, truly, if you're not doing what it is you're designed to do, what are you doing?
Right.
What are you doing? And so, he's been on me, about getting that book going, getting these things going, dropping ideas. About that, I really always, and I've always told the kids I've spoken to, of all the skills you can master, of all the things you can really become really good at, is, I would say, relationships. Build relationships, learn to listen, learn to take criticism, learn to take criticism, and learn who to take it from. I don't take it from people who have no credibility. You know what I mean? Like, and that was the thing for me. I was spoiled that way because all of my teachers were also performing artists at a very high level. So I don't listen to people who aren't out there doing it. I've never listened to academics. If your hands aren't in the dirt, if you don't know what it's like to get these scars, and so I don't want to hear from you. You know, I listen to that person who's been out there because they can tell me certain things to look out for that, you know, the regular academic just has no clue. You can't learn in a book.
That's so true. It's so true. You know, and you were mentioning earlier, you know, about the circus, and you spent 18 years in the circus, traveling the world, performing for crowds every single day and night. And I want to get into that, but you had also mentioned how you are now in the record books, right? Yes, you were the last ringmaster, but you were also the first Black ringmaster. So what was that like, breaking a color barrier, right? Like when you think about it from the standpoint and everything you were doing, you're like the Jackie Robinson of the circus. Like you broke a massive color barrier on the grandest stage of them all. What was that like, and how did, you know, the circus approach it? Was it a different approach because of your skin color? What did that look like?
You know, initially for me personally, it was an annoyance. I thought it because I didn't want to be a token. I didn't want people zeroing in on that. And I didn't want it to take away from the work. Right. You know, my goal was to be as good as I could be. The circus, you know, it's a business. So they took full advantage of, you know, it was a lot of media. There was a lot of media attention, which is what they should do. You know, you're running a business like that and you have a new attraction, you're supposed to show it all. Right. But for me personally, I wrestle with it because I'm not one of these self-deprecating Black people. Like I love my heritage. I love my culture. My goal, like any free-thinking person, is you just want your humanity fully expressed. And you don't want everything tied up in one feature of you. You know, of course I'm beyond my skin color, although, I mean, it's a part of who I am. You know, I definitely don't believe in that whole I'm colorblind. I hate those people. I think, you know, all the colors are wonderful. I think it's great. I think it informs how we are. And, you know, of course, even within those groups, there's no monolith. You know, you meet all sorts of different types of people. You know I was a strange kind of person to a lot of people. I did not fit a lot of what people thought. You know, I'm 6'4" tall. If you saw me walking down on a basketball court, you'd think, wow, we're going to really do something. And you would be gravely disappointed. You know, even my musical tastes are so eclectic. You know, just so eclectic. And that has a lot to do with just being in the Boys Choir of Harlem. You know, I never looked at Mozart with any more regard than I did Duke Ellington, you know, or Notorious B.I.G. You know, I mean, I could dig into music and I could look at it and enjoy it for its content and value. But, you know, as far as being the first Black ringmaster, the only real challenge that it posed was the media. Mm-hmm. Because I noticed the more local, the smaller the publication or the smaller the media outlet, the more authentic, the more real news it was. The bigger, the more sensational, the more it would cling to racist tropes and stereotypes in a very glossed over way, but it was so obvious, you know. And that was annoying, but again, I had some grace. It was a wonderful writer from the New York Times. My first major national exposure, he told me right after. Yeah, he told me right after our interview, and it was very cool. But he said, "Look, so I'm just going to tell you, they've already written their story about you." And I was like, "Wow," you know. And he was right. That's how the majors play. You know, they keep, and maybe that's why we have so many distresses. You know, people talk about all of these different things that arouse our racial tensions. I think the media is the greatest culprit. of it all. They're like the Svengali of it, because, the more you make the more you make less of somebody, well, the less it matters when you kill them. So with me, it took me a while to really embrace it, even though I had wonderful media training. I had this wonderful, and she and I are still buddies till this day. I had this wonderful publicist friend of mine who really would coach me through. She's like, look, you need to really embrace this, because it does matter. History matters. You matter to so many. And I didn't really get it until about a year into the gig. And we ended up in Chicago, which is, I love Chicago. It's always a beautiful
love that city.
Run. It's one of the great cities. Honestly, I always tell people downtown Chicago is like one of the most gorgeous things ever. And so I enjoyed it. I actually got married in Chicago after the show. That's nice. Another story. But we were in Chicago, and I started to there were people who were approaching me in different ways. There was this beautiful single mother, and she came to me, tears in her eyes, and she said, I wanted my son to see you. And so I started understanding it more. But the thing that pushed me over, that really locked it in for me, was my grandfather. My grandfather came into the show with my grandmother, of course, and there's nothing more exhilarating than seeing your grandparents turn into 6-year-olds. And it was just so fun. And I went to see them after the show in the stands, and we're talking, and my grandfather's just, he's beside himself, because he himself was a singer at one point as a family, and apparently he was a very good singer. And he would always tell my mother, it's great to see Johnny Boy out there. That's what he called me. He's from the South. Johnny Boy. He said, Johnny Boy, I get to live and see the world through Johnny Boy. Because when I would travel with the boys choir, I would travel with the circus, he's like, where you at now? He would just live through me. And so we were talking, and, after he just lauded me with compliments, he just paused for a second. He said, Johnny, he said, there was a time I couldn't sit here. He said, I couldn't sit here. I couldn't sit wherever I wanted to sit. And I'm looking out here, and that's my grandson in the middle of all of this. And he just left it there. And then I went, okay. And I got it. And so I've carried the philosophy from then on, even in regards to my talent, is that nothing is self-service. Like, your talent is more than your passion. It's really your obligation. These things that are bestowed upon you, they're not about you. It wasn't about me getting my name scribbled into the history books, which is an honor. But it really is an obligation. It's a vehicle for God to work in you and to work through you. So it's really a humbling thing. I mean, at the end of the day, you're just a conduit. And you're just a conduit who happens to have been blessed with something, and been blessed with a certain position, and been given somewhat of a blessed burden to carry. But when you see it from the aspect that it matters to somebody, it means something more than you can think, you don't have a right to take that away from other people. And so from then on, I really embraced it. And I tell you, it would roll on even more. I would need all sorts of children of all ages and of all colors. I really began to understand how important it was, not just for Black children to see me, not just for Black people to see me, but for people, period. I really began to take that responsibility serious. And it really guided my conduct, not only as a performer in front of the curtain, but as a human being behind the curtain. How I represented myself, how I behaved was very important, because, is it unfair? Yes, that somehow, Black people just can't represent themselves individually. Like, I just can't be an idiot, and Johnathan Lee Iverson is just an idiot. Somehow I know, if I went and did something insane and stupid, what have you, somehow all Black men are this. And that's unfair. But it works the other way around too, in some respects, because I knew if I was doing what I needed to do, it made my credibility when I cracked that door open for others to follow me, it made it that much stronger. And subsequently, that's exactly what happened. There were more African-American ringmasters who came behind me. There was a woman, there were, Latinos. It really became more colorful. And because, when you're the first, you're the great social experiment. Yeah. And so I think Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey appreciated that. First and foremost, I lived up to the rigors of being ringmaster, that I honored the position. That's first and foremost, that I wanted to honor the position. And I wanted to be as excellent as possible in doing it. And, from my days in a boys' choir, I was always taught in the ambassadorships. So I was built for this. And so I was taught that you always represent, when we go out on the road, when we go to other countries, you represent your country, you represent your neighborhood, you represent your families, and you represent your people. And, my mother, same thing with her. She would always tell me when I say, take Jesus with you. Take Jesus with you. You represent, she was one of those who grabbed me by the shirt if I was trying to sneak out to go to school with a wrinkled shirt. It's like, because you represent this family. So iron that shirt, tuck it in, and, then you can go out. So representation and being an ambassador was always something that was, that resonated with me since I was young. So I was perfectly placed, and I eventually truly embraced the gift that I was given, and I didn't look at it as a burden ever again.
Yeah. And obviously, it's interesting during these times having this conversation with you during Black Lives Matter rising up and the protests and all that stuff. And if you don't mind me asking, and I want to respect you in this conversation, but how do we approach this scenario, right? Like, as somebody who broke a color barrier in what you were doing, you had to approach it in a certain way. You had to conduct yourself through the media in certain ways. And you were told straight up by the New York Times, well, they've already written it. And it doesn't even matter what you said right now. We've already written it. Yeah. So you conducted yourself in a certain way. So how do we as a nation stand up together? And like you said, we're not colorblind. Like, the color is beautiful. All the colors are beautiful. How do we do that as a nation, to step forward and start to rise up beyond what's happening right now?
Well, I would say, do what Jesus told you to do. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's a very simple instruction, and it's hard, as James Baldwin said, love is a war. Love is a growing up. And so in loving your neighbor as yourself, people have to understand being outraged is not enough. You have to be inwardly vigilant. You have to be diligent about the work within yourself. I always remind people that the sin of racism, like the sin of sexism and all the isms and the phobias and all this stuff we make up, that really, I would think it's just these are false idols we create to crush people for some false sense of power that really ends up disenfranchising us. I mean, if you think about it, the fact that there were policies and laws put on the books to incarcerate certain groups of people, think about how much genius we threw behind bars just to be cruel. And there's just so many other things. I remember the late, great Shirley Chisholm said that in regards to women, so much genius goes by the wayside because it has a skirt. It comes down to love. It's really, it's the hardest thing for us to do for some reason. It's the hardest thing to really look at yourself. And that's where I tell everybody, start where you stand. You don't have to save the world. You don't even have to go to a protest. You don't have to save the world. Start where you stand. Start asking yourself some hard, serious questions. Why did it take me this long to see this?
Yeah.
How is it that I could play and work and even marry and even mate with these folks and not see this? What are my blind spots? Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to engage And it really has to come from others because, quite frankly, it's not up to Black people to have the conversation. We've been having a conversation for 400 years.
Yeah.
If as I've told people over and over, if you want to know, if you really want to know, you'll seek it out. And the information's there. There's a lot of things we all can do for our own soul's sake. But on top of that is love your neighbor as yourself. And so you ask, self, how would I want people to react to me during this time? How would I want them to see me if I were in this situation?
Yeah.
It's really, it comes down to that. You don't need a special invite. If the name Black Lives Matter ruffles your feathers, well, maybe you should ask yourself why. Yeah. It's not the marketing strategy. It comes down to basic justice and equity. That's what everybody wants. Nobody wants special treatment. No one's ever wanted special treatment. That's a myth. People want nothing more, nothing less than justice and equity. People want their full humanity expressed. They want to just be. They just want to be. Just get literally get your knee off my neck. That's all. If you feel tall by me being on my knees, there's something wrong with you. Mm. And so that's why I say to people, we have to do great introspection. This is a time for parents to really get to work. This is a time for clergy to really get to work and teachers to really get to work. Those who have such internal influence in our lives to really get to work, because clearly they've been lacking. Yeah. Clearly they've been dropping the ball in some way because we keep passing these terrifically horrendous legacies down from one generation to another. And so my greatest concern is that, after the outrage goes over, that people just go back home and it's business as usual. What we have to understand is change, pruning is a process. And God is very thorough. He does not leave any stone unturned. He's a killjoy. God is God. And, in love, God is love. Love works the same way. Anybody that's been married for more than 5 years can tell you this. It will gut you. It will check you. It will make you look at yourself deeper. No, it's not always her fault. No, it's not always his fault. No, he doesn't have to change. and if he does, you still have things to do that will change you. I hear it all the time from amazing married couples, and you hear it. A husband who will say, I was such and such. I was lost. I was gone. I was checked out. And my wife, who by right should have left me, somehow she became so much more productive and so in building herself up that it almost condemned him to where he had to catch up. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said something very stunning once. He said, you don't have to condemn a dirty glass. Just put a clean one next to it. It'll condemn itself. And that's what tends to happen. And that's what I mean, that we have to do our own real soul searching. Why do you hold on to myths? Like race itself is a myth. I mean, you're as light as you are. I'm as dark as I am because of weather. Literally. And it doesn't mean these different colors don't have their own uniqueness and we don't have unique cultures. I think all those things should be celebrated. So as long as nobody's crushing anybody, I think we should learn about these different things as open as the cultures want to be. I don't think, listen, and there's some of us who aren't about we are the world who want to hang around. That's fine too. But, if we can live in a way where we're not crushing each other over just nonsense and myths. I mean, we made an idol out of race so much that it's in everything. It's in every stinking crevice and corner, and it's exhausting. it's exhausting. It's like, it's exhausting to live with it. It's exhausting for me to have to take all these weird precautions with my children who are as goofy and silly and brilliant and curious as any other kid. But, I remember my son who used to always wear a hood. And me and my wife are tall, so he's a giant.
Yeah.
But, anybody knows he's like the most like just innocent, cool kid, really brilliant, very intelligent, very empathetic, silly. He's a techie like every other kid. But I remember him going out the house once, and it's so crazy. I had to catch myself. I would like pull his hood off, and he's going, "But Dad, I'm cold."
Yeah.
And what am I going to say? Well, son, I'm scared. That's a horrible way to live. Where I know he's cold. His mother's from Brazil, so he's like, and they get cold easily. And he gets cold easily. I was thinking that just happened to a young man recently. I read his story, Elisha McLean.
I just read it yesterday.
It's just,
yeah,
it's just heartbreaking. This kid, he's a violin. He played violin for animals, man. I mean, like, you couldn't get more charming and innocent than that. And you have people who can't see his humanity, and unfortunately, we have to deal with that reality too. That we have moral monsters among us. And they happen to be in politics. They happen to be in law enforcement. They happen to be in our criminal justice system. They happen to be in our housing. They happen to be everywhere. Yeah. And I think by us doing our own particular work within ourselves and getting serious about creating a just and equitable society, we will condemn them by the cleaner we get and the more light we allow to shine. Because we have to have light now. I saw everybody blacking out their profiles. And I had one friend, she said, "No, I'm not blacking out anything." She put a candle in hers. And I said, "Yeah, I like that, because only light can extinguish the darkness. And you need it. We need it more now than ever." And so I challenge people to listen, turn your light on. And light, listen. I once wrote, I said, "Let your light shine until you set the world on fire." That's what you want to do. Let your light shine until you set the world on fire. Till there's, and that's how heaven is described, ironically enough. That it's just so bright. It's just light all over the place. You hear about it when you read the descriptions from the prophet Daniel and John in Revelation and mirrors, where they're describing Christ as just this bright light. And of course, people have had arguments over the race of Christ from that, because his skin shone like bronze and stuff like that. I've been having this ridiculous conversation, but it really doesn't matter. The reality is there's light, there's light, there's light. And with light, you see the truth. You can't hide, and that's what we need more of. So I really charge people, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Just say that am I loving my neighbor as I love myself? And again, you don't have to fly to India to get this epiphany. You don't have to save the world. Believe me, there's a neighbor next door to you that would love to hear from you. There's a kid in your neighborhood is going to jail if somebody doesn't intervene. There's shenanigans going on with the local officials where you live, where you could step up and say something about it, and maybe use your own particular weight or privilege to thwart whatever funky little things they do. I mean, this is something, we don't have to wait for a president to do anything. The great thing about our government is we have checks and balances, but it always comes back down to we, the people. Always comes back down to we, the people. And I would also recommend, on a practical sense, that in your soul search, I would actually recommend people just take a step back from all media consumption, except this show, but all media consumption. I think people should read more. I think they should have more we can't now, but at least Zoom in your friends, have some real conversations with people. I had a wonderful friend the other day it was like stunning. She called me on Juneteenth, and she is as lily white as you can get. And so I thought, but she started telling me her background, and she's actually an immigrant. I wouldn't have known. I thought she was like a Valley girl. But she has these beautiful sons and, wonderful husband, wonderful family. And she's one of the most prolific and busy moms at the school. And she's just a great person. And she called me. She said, I want to be able to, she said, personally, I think this should be a national holiday. I'm reading a little bit about it, and I want to know how I celebrate it and things like that. We engaged in this great conversation. And I told her, I said, this is how this stuff gets done. You have to be willing to open up. And I've told people, you have to also be willing. It's fine. Stumble. Just keep showing up. If you're showing up with a pure heart, that's all of it. Show up with a pure heart. You don't have to have the answers, because why would you? I don't expect, the many white people have been waking up to it lately, because a lot of them, I keep hearing people condemning themselves. How can I have known? Oh my gosh. I'm like, calm down. Like, there are things women go through that men, we're just going, huh? Stop. Why would you know? It just wasn't your experience. Well, now you're awake. Now it comes back down to, what would Jesus say? He'd say, love your neighbor as yourself. We know how to solve this. It's just a matter of obeying.
It's true. And I mean, you said so many beautiful things during that time, and you worded it so eloquently. Like, and it's funny because there were a number of things that kind of hit home for me, right? I've never been racist my whole entire life. My parents taught me the right way. My grandparents were a different story, unfortunately, but my parents taught me the right way. My dad is, my dad's married to a black man now. It's never been a question of anything. But then I started to, and I've never shared this publicly. And so now this podcast that gets played in 100 countries every single week can hear this. I did recently post a video in a podcast episode talking about how I am white privilege. But the part that I didn't share during that time was that I used to get offended by that term because I didn't educate myself on what it actually meant. And I didn't educate myself on what was truly happening in the world. And I said in this video, in this episode that I did, I said, I thought we were better. I thought this country was better than it was. I thought that I was so in my own white privilege world that I didn't realize racism was still a thing.
Right.
And so for me, I mean, I can't really apologize. I'm not condemning myself, but it's like, okay, I should have paid more attention. I should have asked the right questions. I should have been more cognizant of the people that I surround myself with. Some of my best friends, I didn't even realize the things they went through. Like my friend Andre, who's one of the keynotes at my event, I was having a cigar with him, and he told me how he had to wake his sons up that morning, and they watched this video together of somebody who looked exactly like them getting murdered by a police officer in the middle of the road. And so for me, it's been, like you said, it's an awakening to understand that this is still a thing. Even though it wasn't a thing for me, it's happening, and it's happening widely and all over. And I think a lot of people are just saying, what can I do? Like, what can I do to change things? And I love the fact that you said, use your voice, use your privilege, step up, say something, go to the right people, because it is white people that need to make the change. Like you said, black people have been talking about it for 400 years. And so I just appreciate you saying all of that. Because I think it needs to be heard. I think it's an important message for everybody to hear. And the way that you approached it was really, really great. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. If I may, I'd like to recommend a couple of resources, since people have been asking, like, well, what should I read? I would recommend, there's a wonderful little book called Black Like Me. And it was written by this white gentleman. I forgot his name, but it's brilliant. And there was a movie made out of it. I think it starred Spencer Tracy. But there was this white gentleman who actually, took some pills, did some things to darken his skin, and he went to live in the South during the Civil Rights era. And it was a real awakening for him, to say the least. I think people would benefit to read that book to get what his insights were. I would also recommend, if you haven't, to sit your families down and watch the docuseries Eyes on the Prize. Eyes on the Prize. It covers a good portion of the civil rights movement. It's a brilliant piece of work. And there's so many other things to look at as well. But, as far as people looking for things to read and research, again, open yourself up. I'm sure there are a lot of book clubs happening now, and really great conversations. I see some of my white friends, man. It's so funny. They're up here popping up books like crazy and really opening up. I've had people, and I've told them, listen, that's the courageous thing. Because when you're dealing with a painful thing like that, and I think a lot of it has to do with, wow, how can I not know? Because I really do believe people actually love each other. But even, it's like, you can be married to somebody for years and just, you hear about it all the time. You can miss things. You can miss things. And I think what's happening is, in a tragic way, it's still beautiful because people are now going, wait a minute. And there are people I'm seeing, and the reason why I kept leaning on that self-work, I'm seeing people do it. I'm seeing some people really say, I'm going to do that self-work. I'm going to really look into my own blind spots. And it doesn't mean that you're like some racist monster because you have them. Everybody has some kind of, you do. It's no way you live this life without your little dark side or your blind spot. You're going to have them. And I say, when you discover those things, give yourself some grace. Give yourself some grace. We've all sinned and fallen short. Give yourself some grace. Take a breath, take a moment, figure out what it is, and then work from there. I always tell the story when I realized I had misogynistic tendencies. And that was hard for me to accept, but I remember the year. I remember what I was watching when I realized it. It was 2008, and I was watching the Democratic presidential debate between then Senator Barack Obama and then Senator Hillary Clinton. And I remember saying something, and it wasn't crude, it wasn't crass, it wasn't necessarily misogynistic, but it wasn't fair to her.
Yeah.
And it was like I saw the words come out of my mouth and look me in the face like, and it was like a moment in time I had to stop. And from then on, even till this day, I've had to check myself. I really went into that. I said, what is that? And why would I think that? Why would I say that about her and not him? What is that? And I really had to examine it. And it's been really exhilarating in many respects because it's made me have to really take account of myself and how I really see women. Truly, really see women. Do I really see them as full human beings? Has been the question. And really, that's what a lot of this comes down to. Do you really see your neighbor as a full human being in their fullness, not just as a Black person or a gay person or the woman or, an Asian person? Do you see them in their fullness as to who they are? And, ironically enough, we've been having this conversation in the circus world. Of all places, right? Yeah. Because, you would think in the circus world, we're a bastion for diversity. And we are, but inclusion is what you choose. Diversity is what happens to you. Inclusion is what you choose. And so we've had to reckon with some realities in our own field and subsequently others, especially in the performing arts. They've been having these wonderful forums that have been really eye-opening for people to see. But, again, there are people taking the courage to step out, to address it, to face it, to look at their own companies, to see what they've been missing, to look at their own selves and understand their own psychology and their own place in this conversation. So, my hope is when we're all permitted to go back outside and play, that spirit is maintained and it progresses, because it's very much needed, because without it, we don't have much hope.
I love it. You know, it's funny. I expected you to come on here and talk about the circus, and we talked about so much more. And here's what I'll say. I would love, as we come to the end, and I have 2 more questions to wrap up.
Sure.
But I would love for you to come back on the show, and we'll talk about that journey as well. Because we didn't even get into the 18 years of living in these close quarters. And that's a fascinating story in itself. But I think that this conversation organically took a turn that was needed. And so thank you for opening up and sharing so honestly, like even talking about your relationships and saying, okay, say you're married, right? And we expect the other person to change. Well, are you becoming what you want them to be? Are you adding the value? Are you doing the things that need to happen? That's so powerful in itself as well. And this conversation has been great. But I always ask 2 questions to every single person on the show. And the first one is, because I get the opportunity with this podcast to speak to some of the world's top, most successful people in the world. And so it's a 2-part question. The first thing is, what's your definition of success? And the follow-up question is, what are 3 things you do daily to ensure that success for yourself?
Wow. Success for me, honestly, is peace of mind. It really is. It's peace of mind. It's funny. I've been really self-assessing in regards to my thoughts about goal setting and plans because of how my life has gone. Right. I've had the visions and the goals, and then my life went, okay, we're going this way. Even though we formed you and built you up, but we did it so we can put you here. So success for me has been accepting the reality it is God who has made us and not we ourselves. And so, you have your plans, as we say in the secular says, man plans, God laughs, right? Mm-hmm. And many are the plans of a man's heart, but at the end, God has the final say. You're not made for yourself. You're made for his glory. And I think success is going the way your blood beats, as late James Baldwin would say, and just following that. And it's not for you to look at the entire stairway. As Martin Luther King spoke about faith, it's taking that first step. Success really is just having faith in that first step and accepting this mysterious journey. We like to believe that we have this almost omnipotent control. And to a degree, there are things we can control. And I guess this brings me to your next question, which is, what are the things that you can do? Obviously, I can't control the final destination, but I can control my prayer life, my mindset. One of the things I try to do, I like to wake up, and really just align myself with the Almighty, because I always feel like I'm steady that way. I like to get in a good workout because it just gets me along. It just wakes me up. And I find the older I get, the more beneficial it is. And I become more intimate with my body, where there's certain things I used to do that I'm like, you know what? That's not for you anymore. So I'm actually reprogramming how I'm going to work out now, because I just had to accept that I was feeling certain things that 20-year-old me was like, well, what is that? Come on, let's go back to the club. Yeah, yeah. And I think third is just getting out there and doing the work at hand. And to me, that is whatever it is you are, make sure you're putting investments in that every day. However minute, put an investment in it. So I'm a singer. I'm a speaker, I'm a writer. That's the bulk of what it is. So if I'm not singing every day, in some capacity, if I'm not writing every day, if I'm not working in some capacity to broaden myself as a speaker, then I'm failing. That's how I grade myself. I'm failing. And so I've had to learn to be a better time manager because of that. Because, it's hard sometimes to accept that you have people call them multi-talents, but I really believe I have multi-obligations. And so, because I really do, my greatest fear is to stand before the creator of all of us on that day. It's not even death. It's just getting there. And he's like, okay, time to give me an account. What'd you do? Because I really feel God is a capitalist, man. It's like, I tell you, be fruitful. And I don't want to be that guy stuttering up there and sweating. I really want to be able to say, hey, look, you gave me this and I returned it tenfold or whatever, because I think that's what it comes down to. And I think it simplifies my life, having the understanding. For me, recently, I asked myself, I said, what is it that really makes you? And the answer that came to me is glorify my God, honor my wife, and be the glory of my children. So if I'm doing those three, I'm fine, because I discovered, especially in regards to men, we really thrive when we're serving. We really thrive when a guy really knows he's a man when he's done something for somebody else. Right. There's something about seeing your spouse's face light up. And what do you got your chest out. There's something about providing that thing for your kids, or even being that bridge for a friend when it comes to something, not to get praised about it, but it's just, I think there's just something natural in there about building up. That's what we're supposed to use our strength for. And so that's what I believe.
I love it, man. So before I get to the final question, we want to give everybody the good stuff. How do people get in touch with you to hire you to speak, to talk at their online conferences as we do now? What's all the good stuff?
You can reach me through my website, which is bigtopvoice.com. You can reach me directly at lasttheringmaster@gmail.com. And I would probably, depending on, who we're talking about, I'll direct you to my agent, because there's certain numbers I don't deal with, things like that. But, you can follow me on Instagram at lastringmaster, things like that. But yeah, you definitely can get in touch with me, email or through my website. And I would highly recommend the website, because then you get to see a lot of the content that I have going on, so you can kind of audition me before you even consider me.
I love it, man. I love it. So obviously this podcast is called the Growth Now Movement. So I wrap up every single interview with this one question, and that is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Wow. Oh my goodness. Whew. I would have to say fatherhood. I really would have to say fatherhood. It is really the most humbling thing ever. And I grew in so many ways as a human being, just in my interactions, because your children teach you too. And we've had the privilege of, spending so much time with grandparents. So that's humbling, because they remind you of you.
And all the things you've done to piss them off. Right.
Right. And, they're there being mischievous with the kids, which is fun to see. But really, it's something about just learning how to rid yourself of generational curses, in a way, because I promised my father that. In fact, it was the last thing my father said to me 24 hours before he passed away. And he passed away on a night I opened up for the first time in Madison Square Garden. Wow. And we didn't know. It was a shock, because he was supposed to be there. But we had this wonderful conversation the day before. He had taken me to Harlem to get my hair cut when I had hair. And we were in his car and we were talking. He was a New York City firefighter. And we were just having this great conversation. And it was really him. I didn't catch it until he passed. I didn't realize what was happening. But he was really laying out his heart. He was apologizing in his own way for certain things he missed. But then he really said to me in a joking way, but he said so. He said, look, I think we were talking about staying in contact with people. And that's really where I get my thing about relationships from. Because, we both were terrible at that, and he said, and my sister's terrible. She don't get on the phone with nobody. But he said, look, you say you got to make sure, you have to make sure you stay in contact with people. You got to nurture those relationships. And I said, but I get that from you. I said, like, why, who you to tell me you get that from you? He said, yeah, but you need to be better. Mm. And I had no comeback. He said, you need to be better. And I took that ball. And I really, really have taken that with me. And so when it comes to my children, there are just so many things they've made me aware of in how to be with them and how to father them. And the things, and, they help reveal blind spots I may have had and how to deal with them uniquely. I have a boy and a girl. So the relationships are very unique. And yet there are certain standards that are very, very similar that I use for both of them. But I think fatherhood it's really grown me up a lot in many respects. It really makes you think in terms of legacy. It makes you think in terms of, the care you need to have for this person. I always joke with my wife. I said, you ladies, you have a baby, you're crying. We men, we have a baby and we see bills. we see this person that you got to pay for this stuff. And, but it's been more than that. I see, the kind of person I would hope I can contribute to them being, seeing someone's potential and what they really are, guiding them to their best selves without having to be too harsh about it, right. In my discipline, but really speaking to them as if they're already there. And so that's something I've learned too. And I've started doing that with other people, really speaking to the best of them. So rather than being judgmental, rather than being harsh, rather than, bemoaning what they should have, could have, would have done, rather, I counter it by speaking to what I know they could be, even if they don't see it in themselves yet. I think part of that endurance aspect of love is to speak to their highest self, even when they don't see it. And that caused me to remember so many people did that for me. And so that's what I've learned.
I love it, man. Johnathan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and your heart with myself and my audience, man. This has been amazing. And I know you're going to be on the show again down the road, and we'll talk about the circus when people are interested in that and they want to hear that. But dude, thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate you having me. Hey, keep the circus alive inside you.
Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Growth Now movement. This is how you can really help me out. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. And let's grow this movement to epic heights. And it's all going to be because of you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.